Welcome to the Northeast Kingdom Voice. I'm your host, Scott Wheeler. Today's guest is Bob Hunt, the Education Coordinator at the Old Stone House Museum. Welcome to the show, Bob.
Thank you, Scott.
Hey, it's great to have you on to talk about one of my favorite topics, history. And, I don't know if people are aware, if people are familiar with the Old Stone House, but it's one-stop shopping for Orleans County history.
Oh, absolutely. We really consider the Old Stone House to be one of Vermont's hidden gems.
Right.
It really is a jewel. Just an amazing place out in Brownington, a historic community that is just amazing. It's like going back in time to the 1830s. Just really one of my favorite places. And what's really neat about the Old Stone House is it's a lot of living history. We really like to get into the older ways of doing things. We have blacksmithing classes and basket making classes. You name it, fly fishing classes. We really try to get people involved.
Right. Yeah, you do. You offer a little bit of everything. It's like kitchen junkets. I remember in the past you've held those. Basically makeshift dance. Making a house into a makeshift dance hall like they did back in the old days.
Yeah, it's really quite amazing. I have more than a 40-year history with the Old Stone House, starting when I first came here to teach school in the 1970s, and then discovered the Old Stone House. And I used to go out there and give the curator a day off, take the key out from under the mat, and just spend the day going through 4 floors of the museum, winding up the clocks and playing the bump organs and listening to the music boxes and looking at the portraits. It was really a great experience that people won't get quite that hands-on at the museum.
I've seen, I've been familiar with the Old Stone House for decades now, just, having grown up here. But I've also watched it evolve over time. And I know in recent years, Peggy Day Gibson, who used to be in your position at one time, during her tenure, there's been and I'm not giving her all the credit, but during her tenure, there's been a lot of positive changes, a lot of additions. Last year, you guys, I think you folks helped create the largest gathering ever in Brownington with the movement of...
Oh, absolutely, moving the grammar school.
Right.
It was just an amazing event. Moving that building, I think we might have had 10,000 people in Brownington that day.
Yeah, it's so hard to tell how many, but I think it's the numbers I read varied wildly. But my wife, who grew up in Brownington, actually she worked at the Old Stone House as a kid. She's pretty certain that that's the largest gathering Brownington has ever seen. They said with maybe one exception of the people who were stranded on the interstate as it passed through Brownington during the fish festival.
Yeah.
But it was undoubtedly it was the largest gathering specific for Brownington.
Now, we even had almost a half-page photo in the New York Times. Of the building coming up the road with the oxen leading the way. It really was quite amazing. And I think that getting that building is really like the last piece of the puzzle to really create the neighborhood as it was in the time of Alexander Twilight. That building that we moved, that for years had been the Grange Hall, had started out in 1823 as the original Orleans County Grammar School, the building where Alexander Twilight preached his Sunday sermons, where he taught school. That was the actual school. So it returned to its original spot there on Prospect Hill. Really quite an amazing building.
I've said this to Peggy on my show before. I wished we could go. Like, I don't know if you remember Peabody and Sherman.
Oh, sure,
the cartoon,
the Wayback Machine.
The Wayback Machine. I wished we could go back into the Wayback Machine and go back and, any aspect of history that that there's nobody alive, and just find out how accurate we are, whether it's on the old stone house area or just any topic, because you don't have much in the way of photos that go way back, do you?
We have a really great collection of photos, except, photography wasn't really invented until like the late 1840s, 1850s. And by the Civil War, it had really taken hold, so that's, we have a lot of photographs from the Civil War era. But prior to that, there wasn't a whole lot of photography. In fact, we would really love to find an illustration of the grammar school building as it appeared between 1823 and 1869. The plan of the Old Stone House Museum is to rebuild the original bell tower that was on the front of that building. We have architectural evidence inside the building, up in the attic, up in the trusses. You can see where the supports for the belfry and tower were cut off. You can see on the back side of the building where there was supports coming out of the wall for an outside staircase. So in 1823, that building had a front bell tower with stairs in it and an exterior stairway off the back, giving it a much larger interior than what it has now, because now it has an inside staircase. But prior to 1869, the building was in a much different configuration.
So you haven't had any luck on finding a photo yet? Because I know you had me
We
helping
have been
you.
looking and looking for a photo or even an illustration or a drawing of that building when it had the bell tower. We have written records from students who were at the school, and they talk about a time they put a sheep up into the belfry as a joke, probably an April Fool type joke. Other boys remembered tolling the bell in that belfry for funerals and standing in that open belfry and watching a horse-drawn hearse come down the Hinman Settler Road to the cemetery while they're tolling the bell up there. So we have pretty good evidence that it existed, but we have no real picture of it.
I bet you that putting the sheep up in the bell tower, I bet you that was a Halloween thing, because I talked to these people. I've interviewed people who are no longer with us, and they talked about come Halloween, they would do these things with livestock or, innocent things. Like they'd take somebody's wagon and put it up on top of the roof. And, it was good, innocent fun. People weren't burning down stuff.
Yeah. Tipping over a privy was popular too, I think.
Yeah, and no, the old stone house really does offer a lot. I know me from writing history. You are a one-stop shop, and you have a huge photo collection. You have postcards, and you can walk back in time. Now, what are you planning for this summer?
Well, we've got all kinds of things going on. We have our Time Travelers Camp for kids 8 to 12. And our theme this year is Medicine in the Kingdom. So we're going to be talking about what medical care was like in rural Orleans County from the early days, back to 1823 when the grammar school got started, right up to the beginning of North Country Hospital in the 70s. So we're going to be talking about that. We're going to have hands-on classes for the kids on blacksmithing, basket weaving, medicinal herbs and remedies, the care of farm animals. We'll have an early American decorating class. They'll probably be making decorated boxes in the Rufus Porter style, where people might have kept their medicines or their herbs, something like that. We're going to do some traditional cooking. Now that we have the grammar school building restored, that building now has a brand new 2-flue chimney, and we have a nice Glenwood wood cook stove. So we're going to be teaching the kids all about healthy cooking and wood stove cooking, bread making, and, talk about, having a good balanced diet, eating a variety of different foods, vegetables, and locally produced stuff, and how to prepare it. That's going to be part of the class. We're going to have speakers coming in, hopefully some of the retired doctors, and we'll be visiting the cemetery, talking about the diseases of the times and how important things like vaccinations are now, and help these kids really to realize, how fortunate they are in this time of modern medicine that childhood diseases are now practically wiped out.
And I think we forget that because I know. I'm not sure if you read my piece. I did a series on Dr. Frank Fioramonti.
Oh, yes.
And Dr. Fioramonti is almost 100 years old, and needless to say, he isn't practicing anymore, but he practiced in a time when out of Derby and Newport, where sometimes he'd have to go a certain ways in his car, then get picked up by a horse and wagon to get further in. He said the further we get out and the earlier generations pass away, the more we forget about what life was like before some of these vaccines.
Oh yeah.
And he said, like, people were dying of things that you wouldn't even consider dying of today.
Just a simple infection from
step on a nail.
Yeah.
That could be a death sentence.
Well, thanks to Dr. Fioramonti, it wasn't for me. I was helping my cousins tear down a pig pen as a teenager, and put a big old rusty nail through my foot, and I got hauled off to Dr. Fioramonti for a quick shot of penicillin. And so if it had been in an earlier time, it could have been curtains.
Because World War II, basically World War II hailed from the sulfur drugs to the penicillin.
Oh yeah.
But that's how come when people talk about the good old days, we need to be careful what we call the good old days, because like the good old days of medicine is when women were dying in childbirth.
Calvin Coolidge and his wife Grace, they lost a son in the White House to a simple infection from a blister on his foot from playing tennis.
Yeah, I when I interview people particularly in their 80s on up, I would have to say more than 50% have either lost a child during pregnancy or in the first year of life, because childhood deaths were very, very common. And then we even go back, Molly Ockett. I think you read that article I did with Molly Ockett. Was an Indian doctress who there was a love-hate relationship between the natives and the new settlers, but they also worked together. And Molly Ockett there's written accounts of her helping some of the settlers.
Sure, they knew their herbal medicines pretty well. Right. And where to find them, but in those days when there weren't hospitals and there were very few doctors, the people had to take care of themselves. Every neighborhood had someone who was known for going in to help the sick or to deliver a baby, or folks took care of one another.
Yeah, Helen Morse, who I've written quite a bit about from Jay. Helen's 95. Has the spirit of a 60-year-old. She said when she had like half a dozen children, when it was time, when she felt it was time, she'd walk across the road and up the road a little bit to a family member's house who knew how to deliver babies out in Jay, and have her baby delivered. I'm not sure of the timeline, but then she'd eventually walk back home. And so things have changed quite a bit.
They certainly have. On my mother's side, my grandmother had all of her children born at home. My mother was born on a super cold night in 1925, the temperature way below zero.
Right.
Was born on the kitchen table, kind of in an emergency delivery. And she was small, and it was cold, and the doctor wrapped her up in a blanket, and they put her in the oven of the wood stove.
Huh.
The door cranked open, but being careful with the fire, but that's how they kept her warm.
The cost of medicine, if you look at some of the old bills, I don't know if you have any in your collection,
Yeah, we're going to be certainly going to be going over them with the kids. You know, the $1.50 for an office visit, $2 for a house call.
and you actually have a room, the Henry Tinkerman.
We did have the Henry Tinkham room, which we've been doing some changes.
Right.
So we don't have a room specifically to Dr. Tinkham anymore. However, we do have a exhibit that is being built
Right.
as we speak. You remember the Austin's Drugstore
Oh, yeah,
in
sure.
Orleans? That the Austin's Drugstore, I think, stayed in one family. It must at least 125, 150 years. Austin's Drugstore was in the same family, and the Austin family very generously donated to the museum. Oh, so many items, unbelievable. Just practically, we were able to go into the building and just help ourselves to whatever we were interested in. I mean, we have soda fountain supplies, we have mortars and pestles and scales, we have unopened new old stock boxes of homeopathic remedies from the 1920s. We have a great set of doctor's scales where you can step up on the platform, put in a penny, pull the lever down, and then weigh yourself with, with the doctor's scales. And just so many things, lots and lots of bottles. And so we're in the process now of putting a display together of items from Austin's Drugstore.
Yeah, I was talking to the owner after they closed, and she was saying that before they could touch it, they actually had they had to have a hazardous waste
unbelievable.
team come in, because it was amazing what those
Old stock just got put in the basement. I don't know how many quarts of DDT-based insecticide there was, let alone probably other things.
Yeah, they actually had an early form of heroin there as well, she was saying. And so I imagine you got the stock after the hazardous waste was taken out of there.
Right.
But no, it was just funny because, the thing is some of the things that they used to use to help people, now you look back at it and you just like, really? But they're going to be doing the same thing in the future. They're going to look at what we're doing for our health right now. There's going to be some things, and they're going to think, what were these people thinking?
Yeah, it is pretty amazing. We do have some, other medical items in the museum that date back to the early days. Lances for bloodletting, and when they used to bleed people.
And they used to drill holes in people's heads.
Tree panning at one time. Yeah, that was kind of in the late Victorian time. But
yeah,
pretty gruesome. We've got some dentist tools that would make you turn and run today.
Yeah, but there's the improvement right there. I know even, when I was a kid, and I know when you were a kid, just in that period of time, the dentist's office has changed so much. Like, I think about our parents' generation who'd have to go to the dentist. They understood what dental pain was like. Now when you go to the dentist, in my mind, I'm still ready for pain. But so I grip right on and...
Well, everyone's seen a treadle sewing machine, right? Well, dentists used to have a treadle drill. My mother told me about going to the dentist as a child and having the doctor using the foot-powered drill, and no Novocaine either in those days.
I know. I might have some issues about modern medicine, but I'll take modern medicine because I happen to be a wimp when it comes to pain. So I want a pain-free life, including when I go to get a shot. And like the doctors would even tell you, back in the old days, they'd give you a shot and, clean everything up, sterilize it, and sharpen it back up, and hey, here comes the next person. So what else is going on? It sounds like this healthcare one, I think, is really a fascinating one. It happens at a good time because the world is, in the healthcare world, whether it's health care itself or health fund in healthcare, it's big in the news, and I think that's a great timing for that.
Well, everyone in Orleans County, of course, has heard the story of Alexander Twilight, how he was the first black graduate of Middlebury College,
Right.
came up here, got a job as principal or headmaster of the grammar school, ministered to the church. But we have another education pioneer who lived and worked in Brownington, who every school teacher in America should know about, and who is really kind of unknown outside of Vermont, and that is Samuel Reed Hall.
Yeah.
Now, Samuel Reed Hall, like Alexander Twilight, was born in 1795. He was born in, Croydon, New Hampshire, I think. But as a small child, they were moving to Canada, and they got as far as Gill Hall, Vermont, when they found out that they'd been swindled, and their deed to their property in Canada was worthless, and they'd been cheated when they had sold their property. So they found themselves destitute and up in Gill Hall, Vermont, which is where they settled when Samuel Reed Hall was 5. He attended some pretty poor backwoods schools. Was fortunate to have an educated father who educated him at home quite a bit. And Samuel Reed Hall grew up to be a schoolmaster, and he really realized that, wait a minute, there should be some training here involved, that not just anybody can hop into a schoolroom and just because they can read and write and cipher, that makes them a teacher. Samuel Reed Hall really looked at teaching as an art, as a profession that you would need to be trained for. And he started the whole normal school movement in America. He taught the first normal school for teachers in Concord, Vermont, in 1823. And he was the first headmaster of Craftsbury Academy. He wrote constantly. He wrote textbooks for teachers, lessons on school keeping, lessons for the female educator. He wrote textbooks on Vermont history and geography for students. Just an amazing man. He, prior to Samuel Reed Hall, of course, the kids would work with a slate at their desk, but it was Hall who envisioned, well, wait a minute, let's have a great big slate up on the wall, which now became the blackboard and is now evolved into the whiteboard.
Yeah, the whiteboard, yeah.
But it was Samuel Reed Hall who developed the blackboard as a teaching tool for teachers, wrote lessons specifically for the blackboard, and then trained teachers in how to use it. He even invented the blackboard eraser.
Right.
But
and that's the thing about that you help do. You help bring out these stories, because there really are a lot of wonderful stories that come out of this area. Like on the front cover of your medicine thing is a photo of Rachel Allen of Charleston. She was the child of one of the first settlers, of the two of the first settlers, and she was a doctor before her time. She wasn't the first woman doctor, but she was an early woman doctor, and she kept a diary, and it's actually a hoot to go down through her diary and see some of what she charged, what she did. And with doctors of her time, she followed you from birth right through to death, and after death she actually helped prepare the bodies a lot of times.
Well, there was a woman too, a nurse out of Glover, who volunteered to do nursing during the Civil War.
Right.
And she was from Glover, and I wish I could remember her name right now, but I can't. But she saw the conditions in some of those camps, and she went right into, one of the head general's office in charge of, those hospitals, and demanded to be put to work, and told him exactly what she thought of the conditions. And she, got her way. So we're going to do some research on this woman during camp. I think that and speaking of Natalie Kinsey Warnock, noted Vermont author of children's books and books for adults, she is going to be teaching a 2-credit class for teachers. It's kind of based on her Story Keepers model. Natalie goes into classrooms and works with kids on finding out the stories of their families and tracing their family trees and using early sources and how to do research, primary sources. So she's going to take these techniques that she's been taking into the classroom to do with kids. She's going to be training teachers this summer at what we're calling the Samuel Reed Hall Center for Education, after our friend Samuel Reed Hall, who we own his house. The museum has his beautiful Federal-styled home on the corner of the Hinman Settler Road and Stonehouse Road. That's the Samuel Reed Hall house. And we're going to have a class for teachers. We've had a couple already going over this past year, but we hope to really make the museum a center for classes in education as well as in old handcrafts and so forth.
So we only have a few more minutes left. What more would you like to share?
Well, we certainly are going to want people to come to our gala, which is going to be at the East Side Restaurant on Thursday, July 20th from 6 to 9 p.m. There'll be a silent auction. We're looking for donations of items for this auction. We're selling tickets to the gala. The East Side always puts out just an amazing spread. So that is a great time.
Because you really do, even as much as you guys like doing the Old Stone House, it does take money.
It takes a lot of money. And when I first started volunteering there 40 years ago, they had one building, the Stone House. And it has grown. I think we're up to 8 now. And we have the Stone House. We have Alexander Twilight's own house. We have the Samuel Eaton House, the Samuel Reed Hall House. We have the Orleans County Grammar School, which I hope people will come and see. It's just an amazing facility. It is absolutely beautiful. It's on a brand new foundation, high efficient propane heating system with radiant heat in the basement floor, air handler that turns hot water heat into hot air. It has a working handicap accessible restroom for the first time in its nearly 200-year history.
Right.
Has running water in the kitchen for the first time in its history. We had so many things. And we'd love to use the second floor too, but because we moved the building, it was no longer grandfathered in, and we have to meet all the new codes, and we can't use the second floor until we build the bell tower to get a second egress. So we need to raise $100,000 just for that bell tower.
Then you have the Old Stone House Day coming up.
Yep.
And when's that?
August 13th is the date for Old Stone House Day. We'll have free admission in the museum on that day. There'll probably be speakers or annual meeting. We'll have luncheon going on. Oh, and oxen are coming again.
Oh, oxen.
We're having another gathering of oxen. It was so successful last year with the building move when we had the gathering.
So what are you going to move
oxen.
this time?
Nothing, except maybe some heavy chains and logs or for something. But I think our building and renovating days are kind of over for now.
When I first met Peggy years ago, the idea of getting that schoolhouse was just a wild dream that was far beyond any expectations.
It's been a wish, I think, for more than 50 years.
And I don't think I think I can say Peggy really didn't think it would happen. And so when it fell into you guys' laps.
Yeah, that expression, fools rush in where angels fear to tread. I think that's Peggy.
Yeah.
When she gets fixated on an idea, it gets done.
Yeah.
And you know, she's retiring.
Oh, is she? I didn't know that.
This is Peggy's last season, so we'll be very sadly saying goodbye to Peggy this fall.
Ah, she's done such a wonderful
She has
job.
really done an amazing job.
Okay, you have a website. Do you?
We do have a website, oldstoneHouseMuseum.org.
And you can find everything.
You can find everything there. You can register for classes. We've got basket making classes coming up this summer. We have a Heritage Class Week. We have Diane Moore from Morgan coming to teach some rug hooking. All kinds of classes during Heritage Craft Week. Early American decoration, blacksmithing, fundamentals of blacksmithing. We've got blacksmithing going on just about every other weekend. There's always something going on
There
in
is.
Brownington.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming on, because
It's my pleasure, Scott.
you folks have been on various times throughout the years, and it's always interesting what I learn from whether it's you or whether it's Peggy coming on. I still am learning more about the old stone house.
I've been associated with them for years, and I still find new things
Right.
in the museum that I hadn't noticed before.
Okay, thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
And thank you to the viewers for tuning in to another segment of the Northeast Kingdom Voice.